I want to thank everybody for coming today. It's always an effort to get upstate and to and to show up in person, but a fair number of you have today, and I am very, very grateful. I hear people talking in the background. If you could kind of lower your voices a bit, that would be helpful. Or
Rose, you can mute everybody in participants.
in participants, okay. Arkady, I can't, oh yeah, I see. Okay. Sorry, guys, you're all getting muted. Okay. My one concern for today was the technological side of it all. I have no clue how to make this all work, and nor do I know if it will. But what I'm really happy about is technology or no technology. Thank you all for coming together. It is a strange celebration. I mean, I've done this now for 50 years. I have had people come to the house wherever I am, living in California, living in New York, to have a gathering. Mostly I would show the Rudy movie after it was all assembled by Bob Sink, and it would be a real gift. And then we'd have a big dinner with a big cake and all the things that Rudy loved. And we would just sort of bathe in the atmosphere of Rudy having sort of left a legacy of something so remarkable that it endures. All of us are sitting here with an energy in a way that has been missing from the world for 50 years, and yet it's still totally present. We're all here in an energy that has timelessness in it. And we are really, really lucky people, because the teaching that Rudy offered was so extraordinary and so much up to the promise that he made to me, which was the day I met him after I came back from India. And he asked what I was doing in India. I said, I looked for a teacher. And he said, did you find one? I said, no. He said, well, I can teach you everything you want to know. And it was rather pompous. It was rather direct. And yet I can only tell you that in terms of knowing, he has done that. In the 50 years since he's been here, in the 7 or so years that I was with him in his bodily incarnation, his teaching has remained at the core. It is a foundational way of living. It is a way of approaching the spiritual from the material, not denying the material. He said your spiritual life starts when you wake up in the morning and make your bed. And, you know, nobody else had ever said that to me before. Making my bed seemed superfluous to the spiritual journey, but it's not superfluous, because it's an attention to the details of being alive, being in the world, living a life that has purpose, meaning, and value, and at the same time digging deep into the undercurrent, the underpinning, the oceanic reality that supports the material reality that we have. So it is the dual thing, looking out and looking in at the same time, and then, if you're lucky, beginning to see them as one whole, one totality, and then living the life that is guided by this deep, deep awareness, what I call the inner GPS that Rudy sort of gave us, the opening of a mind, of a heart, of a gut, a deep feeling of connection to the world, and a way it tells us, turn right, turn left, go here, go there. If you do that, it's a remarkable achievement in life, because you find you come out where you needed to become, where you needed to be, where you wanted to arrive. And what you also really understand, and this is part of the non-dualistic system of spirituality, you arrive where you've always been, which is right here. It's never been anywhere else but here. And to truly wake up to this, to where you are, is a extraordinary, extraordinary gift. And it's not always unopened or achieved in a lifetime. So be grateful that you have this connection. And we're going to sit for a few minutes. It's going to be shorter than normal, because I think what I want to do today, if it works out, is to hand over this seat that I'm in to anybody who wants to sit for a minute or two and just reference, talk about, explain to people why you're here, why Rudy was an important figure in your life, or even just to say thank you. But I will do that in handing over this seat, and then I will hand it over to everyone who's here today in the Zoom world. And although I understand almost nothing about Zoom, if all goes well, and Arkady has promised me it will, when one of you talks, you will fill the screen and you can talk to the whole group. And then if everybody else is quiet, you will take the class for a few moments and share your thoughts. If all goes well, we have another computer here that will let everybody in this room see who's talking from here. And if that doesn't work, my apologies, but we're doing the best we can. And just know that all you have to do at any point, especially at this point, is sit still, go to the chakras, approach them, ask for help, to surrender, to let go, to accept, to open, to be present, and watch them unfold. 50 years, a half a century since Rudy passed. That's a long time. The fact that we're sitting here, one, in his name, and two, the miracle that he's still present in this space, is something that we need to feel, open to, and acknowledge with a great deal of gratitude. And we are, in a way, among the very lucky in this world who have an ability to connect to something that transcends the day-to-day material world, and that is so enriching of our lives and so dynamic in its ongoing presence. The fact that 50 years later, this energy is as vital as it ever was, maybe more vital, is a kind of remarkable thing. So each of us has a opportunity in this moment to go deep and to say thank you. And I think that's why we're here. Thank you, Rudy. So for a few minutes, and we'll see how this works in this group size. Just open up, take what you can get. Know that, I sit here as a channel, but, just a focal point. The channel is in you. The channel, you are the channel. You've always been the channel. It doesn't come from someone else at all. It doesn't even really come from Rudy. It's just doorways, entry points to walking into something extraordinarily spacious and miraculous and beautiful. And it's shining in you. I can see it. I mean, I literally see it in every one of you sitting here, and you. And I really thank you for being beacons of light in this world. And I thank Rudy for turning on the switch. I'll say a few more words, and then I'm going to turn it over to everybody. I'll start with people here, and then I will move to people on the computer screen. And assuming it all goes well, those of you who have anything you want to share, feel free. I will be honest that I don't exactly want this to take a few hours. I'm hoping people can maintain a kind of simple few minutes or a couple minutes to just say what they would like to say. I've been getting wonderful emails from people today who are not here, just expressing their gratitude to Rudy, and I'm not trying to make you worried about how eloquent you might be, but I have to say there is a certain eloquence if you just open up to how in a sense lucky and blessed we are in this world to have a force that percolates and informs and directs and loves us for half of our lives or more. Doesn't always happen. So enjoy the blessing. It truly is a blessing. I think what I'm going to do here is don't know where I'm going to go, but what I'm going to do is start to hand it over to people here. So what I would like is when somebody sits here and talks, they do it. When they sit back down, somebody else comes. If you need to be appointed, that could be awkward, but if you can just try to follow the flow, Rudy would have acknowledged that, it'll work out. And if it gets awkward, I will step in. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Oh, it's very kind and sweet of you. Okay. Because I know that Joseph wants to read some of his poetry about Rudy, and he's already spoken to me. I'm going to let you go first, and then we will let everybody else follow. Okay, so it's all yours.
I wrote these for Rudy during the pandemic, these two. Can you see I lay flowers before you, but nobody knows? It is not the one you see that is doing this. It is the invisible one inside, but it is a secret nobody should see. You left me a long time ago, but I have not forgotten. I was a nobody then, and I'm no one now. And this one is about my time in Big Indian when I lived there. When you were here, I was always the first one, going through the kitchen in pre-dawn light, my cushion in my hand. I would sit right before you in the very front. Later, basking in grace, I would be the last to leave. I did not know how else to show my love. Living here now in darkness, I make the same mistakes over and over. Of course, I cannot see my own light. I am always forgetting who I am and where I am going. I understand this is your play, your dream of forgetting, your little tricks of enchantment, but it doesn't make it any easier. And my last one I wrote a few days ago because I thought I should be, I don't know, it just felt like I needed to write a new one. A half century has come and gone, the years spinning by like a windmill sails on a rainy evening. I still remember you though, the way you twinkled when you smiled, the way you lovingly tweaked my nose after every class. In my eyes, you were a mountain, unimaginably lofty and inaccessible, fearsome and terrifying to approach. Of course, I was very young then and greener than a grasshopper. Buried deep within myself, you gave me the greatest gift of all, a shovel and the energy to begin my excavations. Now, in a continual gesture of transformation, your light roars through me every night, and I can only sigh. Thank you, Rudy.
So we're kicking this off with two roommates from Big Indian. When Joseph was there, I'm Tony Stern. Hi. Brother of Jay Stern, who hopefully is also watching now. Joseph and I were brothers and roommates at Big Indian 50 years ago, or longer even. Yeah, 50 years ago. I will testify and to the reality that when Rudy smiled, his eyes did twinkle, which is kind of cliched and crazy, but it did happen. And I will just mention two things. First of all, just the beauty of Sangha, this Sangha, the Rudy Nityananda Sangha, which includes our dearly departed, like John Mann, who was a big teacher for both Joseph and me, recently departed. Mark Schlossberg, whom we were talking about earlier today, and others who have, Bo Buchanan as a third, many of our Sangha who are now with Rudy, presumably, however that works. I'll mention my first meeting with Rudy and then move on and leave space. This is actually published in two different chapters in two different books, where a friend of mine, her cousin, Natalie Shapiro, told me about Rudy. And so one morning I went to see Rudy at his store, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I blurted out, youngster that I was as well, you look like one of those old Zen masters in paintings. And Rudy said, well, not Zen masters in particular, but just Buddhas in general, because I am a Buddha. And back to that pomposity or apparent pomposity of Rudy. And I started to think immediately, what Buddha in his right mind would ever call himself a Buddha? And before that thought had a chance to coalesce, he proved himself to be a living Buddha, at least in that moment, by approaching about 15 feet in a heartbeat, stroking the stubble on my little 17-year-old chinny chin chin, crossing his eyes in the most disarming way I've ever seen anyone cross his eyes before or since, and saying, you look like a chipmunk. At which point we both laughed, and in a mutual laughter, it is a kind of, whatever it is, it's a moment of, it's an enlightening moment anyway. And Rudy did say two other things that basically, to me, as I've looked back on it countless times over these last 50 years, indicated to me, Tony, don't be a fool and just think I'm some dime store Swami here. Don't let this chance go by, as Kabir in Robert Bly's translation puts it. Don't let this chance go by. So he said two other things to indicate apparent pomposity, shall we say, or actual just telling it like it is, which is one, he said, Tony, if I was in the Himalayas, people would be breaking their balls to get to me. That was one thing he said. And he also said, what's the last thing? Oh, I asked him, so Rudy, what type of meditation do you teach? And he said, I don't teach meditation. Most people, when they meditate, they still their mind to a certain point and then freeze, crystallize. And that's nowhere. That's not meditation. That's not true spiritual growth. He said, I teach energy expansion. He said, right now I'm about the size of Yankee Stadium. And he's probably gotten a lot bigger since then. Thank you. Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you, Blanche. Thank you, Bruce, for opening your home. And thank you, Rudy. So I just want to share, on the way up, on the ride up, I was overwhelmed with the incredible emotion. Sometimes you don't know where the emotion comes from, but I just felt so much joy in the ride coming up. I was reminiscing about some of my experiences with Rudy, and then coming into your home, it doubled down on the emotion, which was great. But back in September of 1970 or 71, I get mixed up with the year. I was taking hatha yoga in the city. I was a drug addict at the time. I was on heroin at the time. And my hatha yoga teacher knew Rudy, and he said to me, Lonnie, you look like you're pretty messed up. I want you to meet somebody. So he introduced me to Rudy. I went to Rudy's store with my mom. And Rudy spoke a bit to me, but then he touched me on the forehead and he said to me, "You have a slightly suspicious nature. Go up to the ashram." So I went up to the ashram, and over a course of 6 months, I cleaned up my act, never to go back. So I also celebrating 50 years of being clean, thanks, and I say thanks to Rudy. Nobody talked about it. Rudy never talked about it. Nobody else talked about it that I can remember. But I was accepted, and it was very, very powerful. So in going up to the ashram, I was responsible for keeping the fire going in the dining room. That was one of my jobs. And one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, and I'm opening up the fireplace, and you see the beautiful orange glow coming from the fire. So who comes walking into the room? It's Rudy. It's dark, it's just the two of us. And he says to me, "Isn't it beautiful?" And we hugged. So that was a very warm experience with Rudy. My mom also was a big fan of Rudy, and she used to come up often. And Rudy had a way of tickling people. I don't know if he spiritually tickled my mom or he actually physically tickled my mom, but he tickled her. And my mom said to me, "You know, I think Rudy's in love with me." But I think many of us felt that way. And she felt that way as well. So
Wow.
there's a few others I can't, I'm overwhelmed with joy. Anyway, thank you for the great opportunity. Thank you again for opening up your home. And we look forward to continuing our great times together. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm Wade. I never met Rudy in person. In 1978, at the age of 14, I got a job as a dishwasher at Rudy's Country Kitchen in Big Indian. Mark Schlossberg was my boss. But really, he was more than that to me. He was a mentor, and he became my teacher, spiritual teacher. Taught me about work and life, told me stories of Rudy. When I turned 18, Mark taught me the meditation practice. And so I still see him now. He comes to me in my dreams often these days. And not long after I met Bruce and I started coming here, this is a dream I had. I was walking and talking to Mark, and Phil Shappis was there too. We were behind the main building of the ashram in Big Indian. We were discussing spiritual growth as we moved towards the classroom. Meditation class was going to start soon. And Mark was my teacher. When we got inside the classroom, Mark sat down next to me. I didn't understand why he was sitting next to me and why he wasn't at the front of the classroom. So I looked towards the front of the classroom, and there was Rudy. Rudy would be teaching the class. So we sat down and meditated, and it was just like, coming to a class here. It was such a real experience. And Rudy worked with me in a very deep way. It was just a really intense experience. So in all that, I'm thankful to Mark, John Mann, the men that taught me this practice. Thankful to Bruce, who was there when I returned to this practice. And of course, I'm thankful to Rudy, who passed this teaching on through Mark and John and Rudy and many others. And I'm thankful to be here with all of you today.
I had just started to go to class in New York. Oh, Marty. I had just started going to class in New York, and it might have been the second time that I was there. And Rudy used to have these dinners, and I looked in there, and everybody was eating this really heavy stuff, like these rice dishes and heavy, heavy, heavy. So I thought, that doesn't feel right. So I walked outside and there was a truck at the end of the street that was selling watermelons. So I thought, this is perfect. And I got myself a huge half a melon like this, and I brought it in, and Rudy was waiting for me on the stairs. And he gave me so much love, more love than I have ever had in my life. And he said to me, put it in the refrigerator. Which I did. That's the end of the story.
Good morning. My name is Cinta. I'm a Joseph wife. I met the big Buddha this in Joseph's house when I first time to come to America. So my first time teacher is my husband, and second teacher is Big Buddha, Rudy. The time that brought me here in America. And then my teacher is Bruce and Mary Pepperhagen and Will Pepperhagen. And then also I have a teacher, John Mann and Stu. Yeah, Stu. I cannot spell. I thank you to I come here to second time to Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. You give me some second time come here. Wonderful, wonderful place. We can. I'm see Bland again. Is my teacher too. All here is my teacher. Also, I'm always see all in the Zoom. That all over there is my teacher too. So I love you all. Thank you so much. You my teacher. Thank you.
I'd like to start if I can.
Okay.
I'm Mary. I didn't come to the ashram until 1974, so I just missed knowing Rudy alive, but his energy was so totally permeating. I lived in Cincinnati where there was a tiny enclave of Rudy followers, and it was really beautiful today. I was very skeptical that we would have this energy still over the Zoom, and it was so amazing. Thank you so much, Bruce, and for all of your friendship for all these years as well. I just remember back then that we would talk sometimes, what would it be like after 50 years of practicing? And to see everybody having blossomed who's spoken so far. And I know how much your life has manifested all your dreams, I think, that you're still growing and still finding new sources of creativity is just, a demonstration of the power of our work and the sense of fulfillment. I remember telling my father back then how fulfilled I felt. And he said, how can you feel fulfilled? You're a 20-year-old kid or whatever I was in my 20s or at that time. You haven't done anything to feel fulfilled, but we were fulfilled then, and we've continued to fill up and expand. So thank you. Thank you, Rudy.
My name is Jordan, and I was familiar with everybody who's spoken in many intimate ways. I don't think I would be alive without Rudy. I started my search for a teacher 4 blocks from where Rudy lived, and after about 8,000 miles, I came back, and when I sat in front of Rudy, I felt like my heart was larger than the block in which his store resided. And, I said to myself, this is amazing. This is, I'm not even on drugs. And I was, I don't know, stunned by his sense that growth is an infinite process. And I just can't imagine how what my life would have been without his teaching. And in particular, how he said that as long as we're open, whatever he said would come to us when we needed it, has just proven to be so true. And it's just, it's a remarkable blessing. I don't know how we came to be in his flow, but there are no words really that can express the gratitude that I feel. Thank you.
Well, this is Kathy Ward. I first met Rudy. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Oh, here I am. Okay. I first met Rudy in 1971 in Bloomington. My then husband and I had been doing mail order lessons from the Self-Realization Fellowship, which were not very satisfactory. And I really felt like I wanted something deeper and something more practical, something to do. And we saw an ad in the paper for Kundalini Yoga, no idea what that was. So we checked it out, and Michael Shoemaker had been sent by Rudy to Bloomington to start an ashram and teach this. And shortly thereafter, he brought Rudy to Bloomington, and we were all sitting in the Dow restaurant, sitting around on benches and chairs and around the walls, waiting. And Steve and I had our little 6-week-old, or I can't remember, 8-week-old son with us, little tiny baby. And Rudy walked in. I didn't know what to expect. This whole thing just seemed kind of, I don't know, to me, I just was sort of waiting to see if I was going to like it or not like it or what would happen. But Rudy walked in, and the air turned sort of apricot colored. And I felt this huge surge of energy just come into me and into my heart. And I felt like I was on one of those carnival rides, that whirl you around. And so you're sort of plastered against the back of the ride, centripetal force. Oh, that was what it was like in this apricot colored air. And then he came over and picked up John, my son, who was a little tiny baby, and just put him on his chest over his heart. And that sealed the deal for me. I just felt, oh, this is my connection. This is it. Yep, that was it. Thank you.
I'm Mary Pappenheimer and Will. And Kathy, I was there when Rudy walked into the first talk at the Bloomington, in the Bloomington auditorium. I don't know if it was at the Art Center, but I also had an absolutely incredible experience. And Rudy was sitting up, on the orange 2-seater sofa, I think, and this orange light filled the room.
Yes.
And I looked toward him, and he turned into Nityananda.
Yeah.
Sitting in front of me. And well, all I can say is that was it for me. And it was experience after experience after experience. My heart was really filled, and I'm lucky enough to have asked Rudy to name my son when my son was born. And I had the idea of naming him Yusef or Joseph. And I hadn't met Joseph yet. So and he said, why don't you name him Rudy? If it's a girl, well, why don't you name the baby Rudy? If it's a girl, you can spell it with an IE. And if it's a boy, with just an I. And so that's where little Rudy got named.
Ah,
And so I'm blessed with big Rudy and little Rudy. Thank you.
So I never met Rudy, but I met my husband because of Rudy. I have Rudy to thank for being blessed with 10 years with the perfect husband. And the way that we met, it was our first date. And Hugh asked me back to his house to see his altar. And never in a million years would I ever have gone to a relatively strange man's. And if you ever knew Hugh Resnick, you know what I mean by strange in a number of ways. But I would never in a million years have gone to a strange man's house after the first date. But something in me just kept saying yes. And I saw his altar. And he explained his altar to me. And at that time, he had lived in the Denton ashram for 10 years. And he had taught, I think for 20 years. And I just kept saying yes to him and his energy and all the gifts that he was. And so much was because of I know that. And we met November 4th on his birthday, and I went to stay with him in Dallas December 27th, and we were married on January 6th. And just were blessed to be together for 10 years until he passed away. And with every day he was teaching me, and his death was no exception. And I do want to also thank Gianna, who is here today, who also came into my life because of Rudy, because of Hugh, as his student. And Gianna, the blessing of your presence during Hugh's passing, and the blessing of Bruce's words during Hugh's passing, just extraordinary. I have no words, so thank you.
So I never met Rudy in person, but I studied at the Denton Ashram for a few years, and obviously with Bruce. And so thank you so much for keeping the connection alive. But so it's been one of the things that's, I guess, like a constant. When I was first started the practice, I was like, oh, I was on prescriptions and I smoked a lot of weed and it was just a total mess. But I started the practice and I was like, oh, this is something I can just do every day. And it was this rock of like, okay, I just do this every day, as much as I possibly can. And I know I had this feeling that I could get it through and I could navigate, which was just amazing at the time. And I've connected with Rudy through his audio recordings and the Rudy movie and the books. But it's just been wonderful, even shifting, studying with you, Bruce, and but having the thread of Rudy and Ananda, it's been wonderful. So that's all I have to say, but I want to share.
I did know Rudy, and I met him through Bruce Rubin many years ago, 1970 actually. And I was in a similar business, and we ended up being fairly good friends besides being my teacher. And I would pick him up in the morning and drive my wife up to where she was teaching in East Harlem. And then we would go on and do exhibitions of the auction galleries in New York. And the third largest auction guy was Bill Doyle. And when he opened, he invited me to the opening, and I said, "Really, why don't you come with me?" So we went up there. And Bill Doyle was an Irish Catholic, very religious guy. Met us at the door, and he said, "George, I'm scared to death. I don't know. I put every nickel and dime I have into this, and if it doesn't work, it's all over for me." And Rudy just went to his third eye and touched him and said, "You have nothing to worry about." And forever after that, he always said, "I don't know what he did, but I just felt great." And he was he became the third largest auction gallery in New York. But Rudy, to people who didn't know him, had this energy. He would make them laugh. He'd make them smile. Some people thought he was in the antique business, and he was in the area where there were 60 or 70 different antique dealers in New York. They looked at Rudy and said, "He's got this great scam going. He's got all these guys lifting all this heavy stuff, working their ass around. He doesn't pay them anything." And what they didn't know was Rudy gave them a life. He really did. Another fairly quick aside was Rudy always told me this, and told a lot of people, that in the middle of August in the summer, his phone rings and it's Sally Kellerman, a fairly famous actress. He said, "Rudy?" He says, "Yeah." "Swami Rudrananda?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Do you know you're the only Swami in town this weekend?" And Rudy always said, "That's a great title for a play." So, in any event, those are two little asides. He was a huge influence on my life and who I am. One other thing is, when he was driving with me 113th Street and 2nd Avenue, where my wife taught school, he would look around and said, "We should start an ashram up here." And I said, "Geez," to myself, "I don't want to come to class at night." So in any event, I'll let somebody else take over from here.
Let's see. I think I start by saying I agree with Joseph that my greatest gift from Rudy was a shovel. I really didn't know I needed one, but I found out quickly when I moved to the ashram. So I came to the ashram in Big Indian in 1971 through Frances Gitter. I came to visit her and stayed for almost a decade, including about 3 years after Rudy died. I moved to Bloomington. I have a lot of, I was terrified of him, but at the same time, I felt really loved and treasured. And because of that, I think it's gotten me through a lot. And his practice sort of remains the core of my life. And I'm just grateful to have ever met him, and that he started me on something that I don't know if it would have taken me another few lifetimes to find. So I'm still using that shovel. That's all I could say. Thank you.
So I met Rudy in 2013 through the form of Silver Raw Baker, or Robert Baker, or maybe Bobby Baker. And after we met in the desert in June of that year, I asked him, so what is it that you do in Texas? Because we'd already known each other. And I was like, so what goes on there? What do you guys do? He's like, "Oh, I teach meditation and this and that." And so he introduced me to, I was living on the East Coast at the time, and introduced me to the stupa in Big Indian. And so the stupa was my very first, aside from silver, the first entry point to Rudy's work and the land up there. So after that, I moved to Texas about a year later and spent almost 5 years there, where I met Zach. And so what a blessing Rudy's work has been in his life, in opening my heart and understanding what that means to live in a surrendered state, and to be able to sit in my own, and to be able to work with that energy to surrender that and to grow spiritually. So I'm forever thankful. And Bruce, for you working on Zoom, and I'm just hope someday we can all meet at Brio's again. That's my goal. So that's what I want to say. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I'm struck by that line in Joseph's poem, the simplicity of, "I was nobody then and I'm no one now." And it really almost for me encapsulates the teachings for me of Rudy, of just that identity dissolution and the shovel that I've gotten through this work. I feel blessed to be here. I know I've been to a bunch of Samadhis in person. And even though I haven't met Rudy in this life, I'm not even sure that's true now because he passed 50 years ago. I was born in New York City 55 years ago. It could be that our paths crossed then. But what I do know is through his teachings, he never dies. Through the work of his students and Bruce, I feel connected to him. He has shown up in my dreams as well. I love the spirituality and the mundane aspect, Bruce, that you spoke about. It's shifted my whole perspective in life as well. I realized when you told that story about how you met Rudy, how you traveled the world to find a teacher only to come back to home and try to sell these carpets to him and what he told you. I realized I've retold that story many, many, many times to people when they ask about my meditation practice. And it's such a beautiful metaphor for life to come back home to wherever you are in that moment. And yeah, his teaching clearly lives on forever through the work that you continue to do, Bruce, and that we continue to be saturated in. So I'm just humbled and grateful to be here and share this moment with you all.
Hi, I'm David Saltzman, and I met Bruce when I was just had graduated from high school, and a few years later, I was on my way to India, and I knew that Bruce taught meditation, and I had a layover in LA, so I asked Bruce if he would teach me his practice, and he taught me the exercise, and he gave me this little postcard-sized photo of Rudy, and he told me to sit every day and don't do any hallucinogenic drugs. And I went to India, and I was friends with all these other backpackers who were all on these spiritual quests, and I felt a little smug, like I had Rudy, but I didn't really know much about it. I was just a kid, but I was doing this meditation, and one night, all these people in this guest house where I was hanging out it was New Year's Eve, and everyone was smoking ganja, and I thought, you know what, I'll just give it a try. And it went really bad, and I told this guy that I was kind of friends with, like, I don't feel good, I think something's wrong. And I really had like a super bad trip, bad experience. It was really scary. And this guy came, and he like sat with me the whole night, and I had to call a doctor, and it was pretty scary. And the next day he was like, what is this photo that you're sitting in front of, and you know, maybe that's what caused this problem. He was like, you should go down, I heard about this guru, you should go see her. And so I traveled down to Ganeshpuri, and I went to see this Guru Mai, and having no idea that there was any connection to Rudy. And I sat in this big shrine for Nityananda, and it really healed me in a lot of ways. But I still felt really guilty that I hadn't, you know, that I thought that I had sort of broken this promise to Bruce that I was following his guru. And I wrote him this whole letter from India apologizing. And I got ready to like send the letter, and I opened up my journal where I had all my addresses. And I noticed that the guy who had sat with me that night in Varanasi, he was a German guy, and his name was Rudiger, and we called him Rudy. And I had never put that together because I was so just panicked and everything, that Rudy really was the one that had directed me down to Ganeshpuri and to Nityananda. So while I never met him, that was always a close connection for me with Rudy. But I want to, thank you, Bruce. I mean, Bruce has been a mentor, a teacher, a boss, a life leader. And this work has really given me a life that I certainly wouldn't have had without it. it's so beautiful to see everybody and to hear these stories from those who sat with the physical incarnation of Rudy. And thank you for having this, Bruce and Blanche, for being my family and my teachers. So thank you.
Just grateful to hear everybody's shares. It's been really amazing, especially, I love Joseph's poem. Everybody really shared so beautifully. Thank you. I felt struck to share because I've never met Rudy. I first met Rudy, I guess at the ashram in Denton. And I didn't right away recognize, what I had just connected to, or the level of what's really available and who Rudy really is. I think at the time I was so in need of such a different unconditional love, something I'd never experienced before in the way that Rudy has and gives so freely and offers it. So I honestly think Rudy had to woo me in a sense for me to really be able to understand and break down with the shovels and with the deeper understanding and with that level of heart. So my experience of Rudy has changed my life so profoundly because I never met him in person. And to me, what was in person was real. So the teachings I've received, the understanding I've received, because there is such a certainty within me, how Rudy talks to me, how Rudy teaches me what I feel. It's realer than, what's in front of me a lot of times materially that is real. And I think for that reason, it has had the most profound effect on my life, and not just me, but everybody who I interact with, since this is such a clarity. I mean, I remember one time I was at a tea shop and there was a mug, and the mug said, "Baby, you are magic." And I literally read it and heard Rudy's voice. Like, I was like, he's saying that. It was so weird. But I didn't try to deny it. I knew that was the case. And I remember Rudy would tell me, give Bruce a call, Bruce has been amazing being a human in my life. I'll cry. And Rudy's like, reach out. And at first I was like, well, what am I saying? It's like, just reach out. And there was a little bit of hesitation. And Rudy would literally expand the energy in me to give me the resource to make those connections and reach out. And especially when I heard Rudy say, reach out to Bruce and, really open up to being able to offer Rudra meditations yourself to the people you work with. And I could say, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's, really where I'm at. And Rudy's like, oh yeah, baby. And, I could feel the energy expanding and reaching out to Bruce and just the series of what has unfolded. And so I feel blessed and grateful, and thank you everyone in this space, and Bruce for just being that focus of Rudy for so long, and Silver Raw Baker and everyone involved. Thank you so much.
I met Rudy through a book, the book by John Mann, 14 years with my teacher. By that time, Rudy had been gone for 30 years, but to me, strangely, he felt more alive than probably most people I knew, including some spiritual teachers and gurus. Our connection was almost immediate, and I remember having a persistent and weird sensation that it was some kind of a cosmic mistake, a glitch in the matrix, if you will, that Rudy and I missed each other in our lifetimes. His idea is that my everyday life is my spiritual life, and that every situation is nothing but a test of my ability to live above it. Those were instantly appealing to me. They were articulated to me so clearly, so naturally. It felt almost like a speech-to-text transformation of my own inarticulate inner voice, like it was only due to some superficial circumstances that I wasn't the author of that book. But what was so attractive is that Rudy's teaching weren't recited from a book. They weren't chanted as mantras, and there were no rituals to perform. He was the way I feel a true teacher should be, spontaneous and authentic. He was the teaching. It was the fabric of his life. What was in the air he was breathing. The same air I'm breathing today. Well, maybe with a little less carbon dioxide, I guess. Well, so it's been another 20 years since Rudy and I haven't met. But him being so present and so alive is what I'm celebrating these days on the anniversary of his passing. Thank you.
I didn't meet Rudy, but I started going to the Cincinnati ashram in 1977. And at that time, Rudy's energy just permeated that place immensely. The ashram was in the inner city of Cincinnati, and we ran what was to be received a 4 stars from the Michelin Guide. And it was grueling, and it was wonderful, and it was magical every moment of the time. Scott Hanley, a good friend of mine, was the teacher, and he emanated everything that Rudy represented. And you would go in within two. At the time, I lived in northern Kentucky, which is a short ride over from across the river. But as soon as I crossed that river, the energy of the ashram just emanated from it, and it was beautiful. It was grueling. It was dirty in a way. I started off washing dishes in the ashram. In the restaurant, and shortly thereafter, that drove me to law school. But at Scott's insistence, and it represented so many people in that ashram, just blossomed, and it was totally apparent at that time. When I joined the ashram, I was smoking quite a bit of marijuana, but and when I got my introduction to the practice, Bill Leonard's, another quite capable teacher at the time, told me there's only one rule: no, we don't have any drugs in the ashram. Well, I didn't live in the ashram, so I thought I had an out. So one day, so I would go to class. I went religiously after that. Every day, sometimes in the morning, I would drive from Kentucky to the ashram. And one time, the last time I ever smoked marijuana was I went to class. Some friends picked me up. We were going to go see Flora Purim in concert at a local dive. And we were the first in line. And I had smoked some pot. I had gone to class, smoked some pot. And I was doing the breathing exercise quietly while I was waiting in line. And suddenly everything, I was totally conscious, but there was this huge light that appeared in me, and when I swallowed, it went down to the base of my spine, and then there was like a fireball that raced up the base of my spine to the top of my head. And all I could hear was, it was like 1,000 monks going om, 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 om. And after that, everything, even the urge to smoke marijuana just left me. I never gave up anything or anything like that. And it wasn't till and I thought to myself, I hope my friend catches me. I think I'm going to fall. And they grabbed my shoulder, and I was conscious at the time, but then I became conscious of the rest of my, it was a good concert too. Flora Purim was quite good that night. But then the guy at the who was the ticket taker, looked at me, he says, I thought he was faking until I saw his eyes roll back in his head. And it's only years later that I found that I did collapse and I had a huge kriya but that's my story about that. But Cincinnati was totally magical. Bruce came to talk, John Mann came to teach there too, and it was extraordinary. And nothing like that could ever be repeated, I don't think, but it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think we're moving toward an endpoint, but
Ruth,
yes.
I'd like to say something.
Okay, please tell me who you are, because I can't. Oh, Haskell, Terrell, I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. Okay.
I never met Rudy in the flesh. I have this fantasy that I was in the city the last summer he was alive, and maybe we passed on the sidewalk. That would be great. But I started doing another practice, and I did it religiously for 5 years, and it was good. It got me to quit smoking pot, but I had this hunger, this need, and I wasn't satisfied. And I thought I was going to a lecture, or actually a hatha yoga class, but it turned out to be a lecture on Kundalini yoga at the ashram in Denton. And I started feeling something, and my vision shifted. It was like I was a photographer, and it looked like solarization, if you're familiar with that. Everything had kind of an orange glow and stuff around people. And I was feeling stuff that I had never felt before. It was really powerful. And I was a philosophy major. And looking back, I would describe myself as a mushroom person. I had this very thin development until you got up to my head, and then it was like huge. I lived in my head. And I was also pretty neurotic. Everybody that came to the lectures was invited to come to class, ask for the exercise. Well, I was too shy to ask for the exercise. So I showed up at my first class, trying in my head to figure out what was going on. And Stuart is looking at me like, and a couple of years later, one of the other teachers there said, oh, after your first class, Stuart said, that guy's crazy. He'll never be back. But decades later, here I am. And that was 5.5 years after the plane crash. And Rudy was still a living presence and a memory of almost everybody there knew him. And I was blessed over the years with the usual cast of characters who knew Rudy. I got to sit with many, many people who were made teachers by Rudy. And everyone who was touched by Rudy reflects a different facet of the diamond that he was. And I'm a totally different person today than I was back then. And it's thanks to Rudy and the people that he left behind who passed on what he had to offer. So, and Bruce, thank you very much for doing this on Zoom. And I'm just incredibly grateful for all of this wonderful energy and love and the chance to celebrate Rudy's life. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, I'm Phil, and I've been in Bruce's class for 32 years, but never knew Rudy. But I have a story or two I want to share. I was seeking with my then girlfriend, who became my wife, and we were in our late 20s or maybe just 30. And we were in Los Angeles, and we'd gone to the White Sikhs, and we sat with some other people, and we were like, none of this really feels right. All these gurus, and it seems like this disconnect between what is out there and this person in front of us. And I was a young writer at the time, and I went to a Writers Guild retreat, which I never do usually. I tend to reject all of that kind of community building stuff. I'm very individualistic, but something was drawing me to it, which was the writer of Ghost was going to speak. And Ghost was very moving. We really loved that film. And Bruce spoke at this workshop weekend, whatever. where every other speaker was very Hollywood and very like, well, when you go to the studios and you have meetings, you prepare this way and that way. And none of it really made sense. And Bruce got up and he was like, I don't really do that. And I don't really have these studio connections you're talking about, but I will tell you the experience that brought me to this path. And he talked about Rudy, and he talked about the stories we all know so well about searching in India and coming back and finding him. And something he said that day I found very moving. He said, Rudy to me was what you read about in the Old Testament when the Jews were wandering through the desert, that pillar of fire at night and that cyclone of dust during the day. And it was this undeniable thing you headed towards, which really was that benevolent, all-powering energy of the universe. And I thought that sounded pretty cool. That's like exactly what we were looking for. And speaking to Bruce very briefly at the end of that evening, he was very kind, and Blanche was there. We met them both. And we said, you know, we're actually looking for a teacher right now. If you have any advice about that, we'd really appreciate it. And Bruce paused and he goes, you know, I teach a class. He goes, why don't you call me when you get back to LA? And we were in that class for 32 years. And one of the magical things about that class was I saw Rudy in that class when Bruce was sitting there. He would transform into Rudy and he would endlessly talk about Rudy. And he was the only teacher I'd ever met who said he wasn't a teacher, he was a student. And the teaching came through him. And it does to this day. And when I sit, I feel it to this day. And that connection to Rudy transformed my life and my wife's life. And we had 2 children and pregnancies in that class, bathed in that energy, who are now out in the world and extraordinary people. My son is 21, completely connected to the energy, not so much to this specific practice, but an expansive, extraordinary person. I know being bathed in that energy shaped him. The energy changed my life. Bruce's friendship, mentorship changed my life. Bruce talked in class about how Rudy reparented him, and this idea of reparenting, that you can be reparented by the love of the universe and people in that lineage. I directly experienced that with Bruce and with Rudy. And that transformation allowed me to grow into a deeper person I know. And that shovel we're talking about is so true. And Joseph's poem was very powerful. Already someone referred to it, but feeling nobody, but then taking the journey to become no one, and what that genuinely means. You know, something we struggle with every day. I certainly do, but at least there's a pillar of fire I can walk towards, which is Rudy, which comes through Bruce. So thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Rudy. It's been a great journey, and it transformed my life. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Rudy for his teaching delivered through you, Bruce. So over 30 years, you know, I went to India too in 72 looking for a guru and met the Dalai Lama and such and so. But when I came back, I ran into Muktananda first in Oakland. We were both trying to sneak out of his lecture, seemingly hit back to back, and he smacked me with this feather and gave me this, what looked like a fortune cookie, but it was a mantra. And, you know, and then a little bit with Guru Mai. And when Julie Ariola introduced me to you, it was, you were a spiritual oasis in what I consider to be a spiritually bankrupt city and a spiritually bankrupt business, although there were an island of artists and spiritual people. And I want to thank you for being that refuge and for making, you know, existence in Hollywood have a spiritual component that without you, without that, I could never stay there all the years. And thank you, bless you, and thank you to Rudy.
So this is moving toward some hours of talk, and I am beyond grateful for the kindness, the remembrances, the feelings, the emotional content of all of this. It's like one of the things that I have discovered through Rudy is that he provided me with a kind of an articulation and even an eloquence that is not mine. And it comes through. I'm not even sure Rudy was the bearer of it. Something greater is the bearer of it. And it's been referenced so many times here today that we've all, in a sense, been gifted by something that's unexplainable, it's truly unexplainable. And all I know is everybody speaking their truth have touched the communal truth that I think we all share. That, you know, there aren't billions of people sitting here, perhaps there should be, that I don't know, but the ones who gather in this name have all been touched by something transcendent. The ability to express gratitude for it, whether it's verbal or just internally, there's no need to make it public, but there is a need internally to find a way inside yourself to go, thank you. It's really meaningful. So I want to say thank you to all of you, direct through you to Rudy. And I think it's amazing. 50 years have passed. Tuesday is the actual celebration, if you want to call it that. Rudy's passing, the day to honor him. You might light a candle, or you might sit quietly and just say thank you for that. The fact that it's Tibetan New Year sounds like it falls right into the alignment of things the way they're supposed to be. So sit for a moment on Tuesday and find your space and connect, and then do that for the rest of your life. It will be beautiful. Thank you all for coming. Rudy, what's to say? Thank you. And I love you all. I love you all. And until next week.